This is Beyond the Business.
Today, almost every conversation about climate sounds the same. Climate race, net zero, decarbonization, targets, roadmaps, commitments, timelines. The language is loud, ambitious, and urgent. But very rarely do we pause and ask a simpler, more fundamental question. What exactly are we trying to achieve in this system? Because before setting targets, we need to understand whether those targets are structurally reachable. A goal that cannot be reached is not a strategy, it is a declaration, and the declarations don't operate systems. Operations do. When systems are designed around impossible endpoints, effort does not translate into progress. Not because people are unwilling or incompetent, but because the system itself is misaligned with the outcome it promises. This is why so many climate commitments feel performative rather than operational. The intention is real and the urgency is real, but the mechanics underneath often are not. If we want to work seriously with decarbonization, we need to step back and look at the system as a whole, not as slogans and not as isolated scopes, but as a connected structure. In mathematics, you don't jump directly to a result. You define the function, you define variables. Some variables can be positive, some negative. What matters is how the system behaves as a whole. Climate systems work the same way. Not every activity can be zero. Not every process can be neutral. But the system, the full chain from extraction to end of life, must move in a direction that is physically, chemically, or operationally possible. This episode is not about chasing a perfect zero. It is about designing a system that can actually approach it. And this is the ocean of waste. So let's start from the beginning. What was net zero actually about? Net zero did not begin as a technological roadmap. It did not begin as an operational model. And it certainly did not begin as something that any single industry could achieve on its own. Net zero emerged as a policy concept and not a physical one. Its origins sit at the intersection of climate science and international governance. As climate models showed that temperature rise correlates not with the annual emissions alone, but with the cumulative carbon in the atmosphere, policymakers needed a way to translate scientific thresholds into political commitments. The logic was simple. If cumulative emissions drive warming, then at some point emissions must stop adding to the total stock. That point was framed as net zero, a balanced state where human activity no longer increases atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations. Not zero emissions, net zero balance. This framing gained traction through IPCC pathways, UN climate negotiations, and later national commitments aligned with the Paris Agreement. It was powerful because it compressed scientific complexity into a single, communicable endpoint: a date, a number, a promise. Net zero became viral not because it was precise, but because it was legible. It offered a shared destination without forcing agreement on the route. And that ambiguity was both its strength and its weakness. The moment net zero moved from climate models into corporate strategy, a structural shift occurred. A system-wide balance was mistakenly treated as something individual actors could achieve on their own. Companies, sectors, and individual projects began to speak about reaching net zero, as if the concept could be isolated, localized, and operationalized independently. But net zero was never designed to work that way. From a physical perspective, emissions are not local. From a chemical perspective, carbon does not belong to a single process. From a system perspective, energy and materials move continuously across boundaries. So, what net zero described was a global equilibrium condition and not a checklist. The distortion was subtle but profound. Net zero became something to be claimed, certified, and communicated, rather than something that emerges from collective system behavior. In shipping, this distortion becomes especially visible. A vessel does not exist in isolation. Its emissions are inseparable from fuel production, port infrastructure, cargo origin, cargo destination, and end of life recycling. You can optimize one segment, you can reduce intensity, and you can shift burdens upstream or downstream. But you cannot isolate the outcome. This is where the narrative quietly detached from reality. This is where chemistry and physics re-enter the conversation. Carbon is not an error. It is not a defect. It is the backbone of energy-dense chemistry. Every hydrocarbon fuel, every organic material, every high-density industrial process is built on carbon bonds. Combustion breaks those bonds. Oxidations follow. CO2 is not a policy failure, it is a thermodynamic outcome. You can change fuels, you can change pathways, and you can change where emissions occur. But you cannot remove carbon from the system by decree. At best, you can displace it, delay it, or redistribute it. This is why net zero, when treated as a standalone operational target, collides with reality. The system is not broken because actors are careless. It is constrained because matter and energy obey rules that targets don't override. To manage complexity, we introduced scopes. Scope 1 with the direct emissions, Scope 2 purchased energy, and Scope 3 with everything else. In theory, this framework was meant to bring clarity. In practice, it exposed fragmentation. Scope 3 is where most emissions sit. Scope 3 is also where control disappears. In shipping, Scope 1 covers vessel operation. Scope 2 may include purchased electricity at terminals. Scope 3 includes fuel production, cargo manufacturing, global supply chains, consumer demand, and disposal. The further you move along the chain, the less influence any single actor has. Yet net zero narratives often simply the opposite, that responsibility can be localized, neutralized, and claimed at the organizational level. This is not a measurement problem, it is a design problem. Once the system is mapped honestly, a simple conclusion emerges. Net zero cannot exist at the level of individual company, vessel, or sector. Not technologically, not chemically, not systemically. The moment you isolate one actor, you break the equation. Emissions are redistributed, not eliminated. Costs are shifted, not removed. Responsibility becomes symbolic rather than structural. This is where the core distinction must be made clear. Net zero is a condition of the system, and network zero is how the system actually moves. The original error was not ambition, it was boundary selection. The system was framed around the wrong unit. If net zero describes a balanced condition of the entire system, then the correct operational model is not net zero at the node level, but network zero at the system level. Network zero does not ask individual actors to become zero, it asks them to become mathematically coherent with the shared equation. Every actor is variable, some positive, some negative, some reducing impact, some increasing it. What matters is not purity, what matters is convergence. From extraction to manufacturing, from transport to use, from reuse to end of life. The full life cycle is present. No actor claims to be net zero alone. Each actor defines their contribution to the network's trajectory toward zero. This is not semantics, it is just structural honesty. Take a shipping. A vessel does not declare itself net zero, it declares its network zero position. Fuel supplier, emissions positive. Vessel efficiency, emissions reduced. Route optimizations, emissions reduced. Port congestions, emissions increased. Cargo overproductions, emissions increased. Recycling and end of life, emissions reduced or delayed. The system is evaluated as a whole system. No one pretends to solve everything, but everyone is accountable for their term in the equation. And that is the difference. Net zero was never wrong in intent, it was incomplete in application. It described a destination without defining a navigable system. It promised balance without assigning structure. It became a button in a world that runs on processes. Network Zero does not simplify the challenge, it makes it explicit. It accepts that carbon is part of reality, the physics sets boundaries, responsibility must be shared, not marketed, and once the system is framed honestly, progress stops being performative and starts being measurable. Not because the target changed, but because the equation finally includes all the terms.